Bava Batra Daf Amud Beis, honey and mushrooms, Ya'arot Dvash. Until this piece of Gemara, I've never really understood the meaning of my hypersensitivity to environment. And that doesn't only mean the environment of where I live permanently or where I grew up. It's every environment, where I daven, where I learn, where I teach, an overnight stay in a hotel room. In all those cases, the environment is very important to me. And sometimes if a client puts me up in a hotel and the environment's not great, I move. And I pay the difference. I find it very depleting to be in an environment that isn't nourishing. And we'll understand from this piece of Gemara how our environments can be as depleting or as nourishing as nutrition is itself. We're nourished not only by what we eat and the quality of what we eat, but we're also nourished by the environment in which we live and in which we operate. And I feel sure that of the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who'll be learning this daf of Gemara today, other than you and I, nobody will see this in the daf, in the sugya. That's the Matmonim. That's why it's a hidden treasure. Let's see where we get this from. To do this, we're going to learn a posuk in Tanakh. We're going to learn a halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. We're going to learn a machlokes between two giants of the pre-World War II period. And then we'll learn our Gemara with a machlokes Rambam and Rabbeinu Gershom. And from all of that, we'll understand the principle. The story is in Shmuel Aleph. Shaul is fighting the Plishtim. Things are not looking too good. Yonatan takes a small band of people and goes off on his own to fight with some guerrilla warfare against the Plishtim. He doesn't even tell his father. And he does very well, and that starts off a successful war. And on the way, unknown to him that his father has made a curse, basically, an oath that nobody's allowed to eat anything until they vanquished the Plishtim. He doesn't want anybody distracted by food issues. Yonatan, not knowing that his father had given out such a curse, dips his stick into some honeycomb, and he licks the honeycomb, and it gives him a lot of strength, and he actually criticizes his father for depriving the troops of food, which he thought was really important for their performance and their capacity. Yonatan lo shama bahashbiya aviv et ha'am vayilach et ketzei ha'mater shebiyado. He put out the edge of his stick, of his staff that he had in his hand, vayitzbol ota b'ya'arat hadvash, and he dipped it into the honey, v'yashav yado piv, and he put his hand into his mouth, v'taorna einav, and his eyes became energized. He saw clearly. It was very good. It was very good for him. There's a machlokes Rashi and Rid. We know the Rid well from our Gemara. You'll remember Rabbi Yeshaya of Detrani from Italy. Always an interesting angle. Rashi and the Rid have a different understanding of what this honey was. Rashi says it was syrup that was seeping out of sugarcane, and that's why it's called Ya'arat Dvash. There was a forest of sugarcane, and syrup was seeping out of it, and that's what Yonatan ate. The Rid says, Hi achala sherodin min hakiveret. This was bee honey. This was real bee honey, and that's what he had. And we're going to see this machlokes in the parish of the posuk is going to be very relevant to us. Let's move from there to the halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. In Hilchos Shabbos, we have the din of kotzer. You can't harvest. You can't cut something off. And I've just taken the Zikr Teras Moshe, the Chaya Adam wrote this beautiful, wonderful sefer on Hilchos Shabbos. For some reason, it's no longer as popular as it used to be. I guess there are newer, more modern Sforim that are written, but it's a beautiful sefer that combines the principles of Shabbos with the halachas of Shabbos, called Zikr Teras Moshe. And on Hakotzer, he says, even if you harvest mushrooms, or asavim agdilim alitzim v'avanim, or moss, that grows on rocks. All of these things, you're chayev, that's an issa d'oraisa. V'chol ha'oker davar migidulo chayav mishum kotzer. And anything that you remove, you harvest from the place of its growth. Even though it's not being nourished by that place of growth. The moss is not being nourished by the rock. The moss is collecting moisture from the air. Mushrooms are not nourished by the earth. That's why we say she'akol on mushrooms, not a borei pri adama. Nevertheless, if you remove them from their place of growth, that's called kotzer. And so he says further, anything that you disrupt its ability to draw from the earth. So if you take something and you put it in a pot that is not connected, you take something out of the earth and you pot it in a pot that doesn't have connection to the earth, that would be kotzer. And then he adds, asur litlosh chalat dvash min hakiveret dahavi ketolesh. You can't take honeycomb out of a hive, because that too is like tolesh, which is a bit difficult to understand because the honeycomb is not gaining any nourishment from the hive. It's completely separate from the hive. It doesn't grow in the hive. The bees make it. And the source of that is from our Gemara, which we'll see in a moment. But before that, there's an important machlokas. There's a difference of opinion between these two giants of the pre-Second World War period. The one is known as Rabbi Itzel Ponovizh. He was Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Rabinovich. He was the Rov of Ponovizh before Rav Kahaneman, and he was the Rosh Yeshiva in Slabodka. Enormously innovative. Unfortunately, he didn't leave us writings. We have what we have of him is by quotes from others. We have very little that he actually wrote, but he was an enormous innovator. He learned together with Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. He was a Talmud of the Beis Halevi. And he innovated the whole method that later Reb Shimon Shkop perfected, the idea of using logic to get to the essence of a concept, to understand the Gemara conceptually, to really get to the higayon, to the idea that underpins the halacha, and to work with those ideas, not just with the surface halacha. That was part of his innovation. And the other is the Dvar Avrom, the Kovner of Rabbi Avram Dov Kahana Shapira. I've spoken about him before. When I repeat stories, it's not because I forget that I've told you them before, but because there are always new people who are listening in, and the stories are often important. The Kovner of, he's the one I've told you that in the tourist book of Kovner, it was recommended the tourist should go, I think it was at 3 p.m., and stand in the Lasvis Alei, which was the main beautiful avenue in Kovner, and wait for the Kovner Rov to take his afternoon walk, because it was worth seeing. He would come out with his top hat and his long coat and his silver walking stick, and apparently Goyim used to line the streets to see the magnificence of this person and his bearing, the royalty of this person, as he would take a walk up and down the street. And I stood on that avenue imagining the Kovner Rov. Then when I was in Kovner, somebody showed me a telephone book. You'll remember the old days, you used to have to look up somebody's number in a telephone directory. And they showed me a telephone directory from before the war, and there was Rabbi Shapiro with his address and his phone number. I think there were 4 digits in the phone number. And there he was, the Rav of Kovner. I've mentioned to you also that the Kovner of this Rabbi Avram Dov Kahana Shapira was ill just before this. He took ill. This was before the Second World War. He was actually in Switzerland at the time. My friend Reb Lezer Kahaneman, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Ponovizh, told me that his father was in a sherut. Sherut in those days were shared taxi rides that you used to have in Israel. And he was riding in a sherut from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv or wherever. And in the same sherut was the Kovner Rov's daughter. And she told him about a letter she had from her father that was a very important letter. I told Reb Lezer that my father told me that story too. He obviously heard it from Reb Lezer Kahaneman's father. Reb Avram Kahaneman was a close friend of my father. And when my father was next in Israel, he went to Tel Aviv and found the Kovner Rov's daughter and asked her to see the letter. And the letter was amazing. I quote it often. It's very relevant for these times. The letter was in response to his children, Rabbi Yerucham in New York, and she was here, begging him to go from Switzerland, where he was for medical reasons just before the war, to New York, and get away from the beginning of the war. And he refuses. He says he can't leave his community, and he's also not well enough to travel, so he's going back to Kovner. He says, not that I don't know about the Holocaust that's going to happen. Right, so this is in 1939. He said, or 1940 maybe, I know that it's going to be a terrible time for the Jewish people. And the reason will be either because we're being punished for something terrible we've done wrong, or because we are the korbanot for something amazing that is going to happen. We are the sacrifices for something that's amazing that's going to happen. How will you know? If soon after the Holocaust there's a major change in the status of the Jewish people, you will know we were the korbanot. if things carry on as they always were, you'll know that we were being punished. That was in the letter that my father saw that he wrote to his daughter. And of course, after the war came the state of Israel and everything that's followed since then. That was the Dvar Avrom. The Dvar Avrom it gets into correspondence with Rabbi Lapin. And they have something in common. The Dvar Avrom is a son-in-law of a very great Godel known as the Godel Miminsk. And the Rabbi Lapin was a Talmud of the Godel Miminsk. So they obviously know each other very well. And they get into correspondence about the underlying principle of koitzer. The fact that you're not allowed to cut something that grows off, or you can't harvest fruit or corn or whatever on Shabbos, what is that? And the Dvar Avrom writes to Rabbi Lapin that I don't believe that the Bavli holds like the Yerushalmi. That is, the Yerushalmi holds that it's separating the organism from its source of nutrition. That's what koitzer is. Says the Dvar Avrom, I don't believe that's what it is, and I know you disagree with me, and I'm going to prove why I hold the way I do. And he goes on to several pages of proofs. He says, I hold ela di ikara kotzeru mishum she'okro mimakom chiburo af al pi shelo haya yonek misham. Removing something from its connection to its environment, even though it's not drawing nourishment from that. And hence the mushroom. So picking a mushroom, even though you're not removing it from its source of nourishment, you are removing it from its place of growth. And that, to me, is the essence of koitzer. And Rabbi Lapin disagrees. He believes that the Bavli also holds that the issue is separation from a source of nourishment. That's what koitzer is. So these are the two views of these two giants of that period. Now let's learn the Gemara. So our Gemara says, Kiveret dvorim, a beehive. Rabbi Eliezer omer harehi kekarka. A beehive is like land. You can write a prusbel on it. It's not mekabel tuma v'harodeh mimene b'Shabbos. And if you take out from the beehive on Shabbos, chayav chatas, you chayav chatas because of koitzer. That's that halacha that we learned in the Zichur Torah Moshe, and it's in the Shulchan Aruch. V'chachamim ein kos v'no prusbel. The chachamim say v'einu kekarka. A beehive is not like karka. And therefore, Rodeh Mimene b'Shabbos potter. Omer Rabbi Elazar, my time at the Rabbi Eliezer, says Rabbi Elazar, where does Rabbi Eliezer get it from that a beehive is like land, is like karka for all these different halachas? Dichtiv, because it says, and he quotes the pasuk from Shmuel that we started off with. Vayitbol ota b'Ya'arat hadvash. And he dipped it in this Ya'ara. Ya'ar means a forest. So it doesn't make much sense in this forest of honey. So according to Rashi, it makes sense because it's sugarcane. There's a forest there. But according to the Rid, that it means bee honey, what's the forest? Ya'aret says Rabbi Elazar, what does a forest got to do with honey? It comes to teach us that just as a forest, if you pick something out of the forest and remove it from its source of growth, you're chayiv, that's an isur, it's a prohibition of Shabbat. Aftervash, harodeh mimene b'Shabbos chayiv chatas. The same applies with honey. Says Rabbeinu Gershon, how do you learn it from the pasuk? Dematzi l'meima betzipichis advash. Why does it use ya'arat dvash? When we have in the Parshas Haman, when the mon is compared to honey, the Torah calls it tzipichis dvash. And whatever tzipichis dvash means, granules of honey or honey cake, there are various different views as to what it is, but Rabbeinu Gershom said, based on the Torah's use of the word, tzipichit dvash would be the right word to use. Why does it say ya'ar? Why does it say ya'arat dvash? So you see from there that it's coming to teach you something specific, that even though honey is not connected to the earth, removing the honey from the hive is as if you've removed it from a forest. That's how the Rabbeinu Gershom learns it. The Rambam in the Perush HaMishnayos in Masechta Shviyos doesn't learn it like that. If you look at the Rambam carefully, V'arodeh mimene b'Shabbos, halokeach mimena dvash. If you take honey out of a hive on Shabbos, you're chayev. That's prohibited. Why? Lefi shehu leda'ato kemi shekotzetz tzemech min haaretz. Look at the Rambam's wording. Because according to his logic, this is like plucking something growing from the earth. Why? What has that got to do with it? But you see that it's not from the posuk. He says lefi shehu leda'ato. Logically he sees it that way. And this is just a smichas lashon. He's just somech. It's not learned out of the posuk. The posuk's not talking about that. The Rambam probably learns like Rashi. The posuk's talking about sugarcane. But since it uses the idea of forestry and the fact that if you remove the syrup of the cane from the sugar cane on Shabbos, that definitely is tolesh, that definitely is kotzer. So the Torah comes to teach us just with a smichus, just because we're in asmachta, we learn that which we know logically, that to remove the honey from the comb is an isur d'oraisa, it's forbidden on Shabbos. What's the logic? Why should removing honey from the beehive be tolesh? Well, the logic would work well according to the Dvar Avrom, because the Dvar Avrom says it's got nothing to do with where it's nourished from, it's just got to do where its natural place of growth is. Its natural place of growth is the hive. And if you remove it from the hive, you're removing something which was created in the hive from the place where it was created, and you're removing from it, that's kotzer. The posuk comes, it's an added thing, it's an asmachta from the posuk. Even though the posuk's talking, as Rashi says, about sugarcane. But not so according to Rabbi Lapin. Rabbi Lapin says, kotzer is only when you remove something from its source of growth. And this posuk comes to tell you that dvash is an exception. That even though honey from the comb, or from the hive, is not removing it from its source of nourishment, nevertheless, it's an exception, and in this particular case, we treat it like kotzer. And that would go like Rabbeinu Gershom says, that the there's an absolute limud, it's a gzerat hakatuv. It's taught to us from the Torah as an exceptional circumstance, although normally, kotzer means separating it from its source of nourishment. In the case of honey, we treat it the same way as if it's separated from the source of nourishment, as it would be if it were syrup seeping out of the sugarcane. So the same applies by the hive, although it isn't really cutting it off from its source of nourishment. So we see the machlokes Rabbi Lapin and the Dvar Avrom playing out in the machlokes Rabbeinu Gershom and the Rambam. What's important, what I want to suggest to you is that in a sense that they're not being cholek on the essence. They are not disagreeing on the essence. The essence is, kotzer is being removed from your source of nourishment. That's what kotzer is. The question is, does nourishment mean only nutrition? Or are we also nourished by our environment, by where we grow, not only by what we eat to grow, but does our environment play a role in our growth? And the way that Dvar Avrom learns, and the way the Rambam learns in the Perush HaMishnayos, which means that that's the way that that Rashi would be learning the posuk, is that not only do we grow from the things we eat, the things we consume, and the quality of what we consume, but we also grow, we're nourished by the place in which we operate. We daven, we're nourished by our davening, but it's not only our davening, it's the environment in which we daven, the minyan we choose in which to daven. I know in Israel, minyanim have become matters of convenience, like supermarkets. You go to the one nearest you, you go to the quickest one, you go to the cheapest one where they don't charge you fees. That's how you decide where you go. But you, as you know, in Chutzrat, so you join a community because you want to be around certain people, and you want to be in a certain environment, and you want to be in a certain place, and you want to learn a certain style of Torah, and you want to be inspired in a certain way by the davening and by the droshes. That's how you choose. It's your environment, where you learn, where you daven, where you go shopping, where your home, where you go on vacation, who you hang out with. These are all things that play a part in our growth. And that's what we learn. Yes, kotzer is removing something from its source of growth. But whereas the Rabbi Lapin and those that he's based on learn that what we grow from is what nourishes us, and kotzer is when we remove ourselves from our source of nourishment. The Dvar Avrom and those on whom he is based learn that kotzer is removing ourselves, yes, from that which nourishes us, but we're nourished not only from what we eat, we're nourished also by the environments in which we operate, in which we live, in which we learn, in which we teach, in which we daven, and in which we experience our lives.